And hello, Heart of Oak. It's wonderful to have Dr. Robert Malone back with us once again from his many travels. Robert, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me on, Peter. It's always a pleasure to talk to you and to talk to your viewership that is more UK centric.
It's always good to have you on and find out what's happening. And of course, people get at RW Malone MD just past the 1.2 million followers on Twitter, on X, and of course, Malone.news on Substack, politics, homesteading, medicine, science, bioethics, analytics, and a heady dose of sarcasm in life. I like the sarcasm side. So give us a touch on the Substack side that people will get.
On the Substack side or the sarcasm side, I'm not sure which. On the the Substack, we've been putting out some heavy duty stuff lately. That's really quite serious. And so today, Jill put out just a bunch of scenes and clips and notes from the farm, which gives everybody a break. But the big hit, I think we would probably be starving these days, and the horses would be quite hungry if it wasn't for the Friday Funnies and the Sunday Strip. These memes that just are incredibly popular. The other day, she put a little paywall in it on last Sunday. And we got something like 80 paid subscriptions off of that, which is not a small thing. So all the power to Jill. I don't know what else to say. Substack has been very, very good to us.
Well, people can obviously, if they like your Friday Funnies, they can click on that and make that a paid subscription. And that supports, I know, what you and Jill do and the phenomenal work all across the world. And of course, Cywar.
You mentioned the travel.
I know. I know. But your book, Cywar, Enforced the New World Order, hardback ebook, and actually the
viewers, audiobook.
I know, can have you reading it to them. What was that like, just actually recording the audio version of the book?
So it's something like 14 or 16 hours after processing for the audio book, and it was at least twice that. So it was a good long week of recording here in the studio, which you've been to here in the pig barn. But the problem is that the road out there has road noise. So I was having to record between about 11 at night and 4 and 5 in the morning. So I think there's a couple chapters where I get a little bit drowsy towards the end. But it got done. It was, I made a promise to Tony Lyons, the publisher, that we would get it done and delivered in time, that it could be uploaded about when the book was launched, which was the 8th of September, October 8th of October, I think is when it came out. And so we made that deadline. There was some little delays in getting it processed by the publisher of the audiobook, but we got it out, and it seems to be that the audiobook sales may be doing better than the hardback sales. So that makes it all worthwhile for all the time spent sitting here in the middle of the night in front of the microphone.
Well, I always appreciate an audiobook that has the author doing it, because you really do feel as though you're there. So people can download that audiobook and have you joining them in the car wherever they drive for a good 13 hours, whatever the road trip is.
For better, for worse.
But you can have Robert joining you on the road trip, which I love. I think
13 hours in the UK. What do you circle the island 5 times or something? I don't know.
Well, we literally would, for trying to get away from Keir Starmer's attack on free speech. But we do want to, I want to talk about US. UK is dire. But for the US, I mean, 2 weeks ago, the American people produced a political earthquake. Just give us a touch on you personally, how watching the results come in, how you saw that as an American.
So just to calibrate, we just had a meeting of the Council on National Policy, which is supposed to be Chatham House rule. But being there, I was recalling the same meeting exactly a year ago, and the mood then was really quite dark. There was widespread belief that the election would be stolen. There would be widespread fraud. That this was just going to be smash mouth, which it was in many ways, but the projections from conservative thought leaders and donors were that this was unlikely to happen. And so coming off of that baseline of skepticism, the polls in the United States had continually made this a horse race, which the media amplified because that's very good for business. But we gradually became alerted to the fact that the polls were all being calibrated based on last election cycle voter turnout and party affiliation. And there had been major shifts in particularly party affiliation since the last election. And I think that the midterm election, in which there was this concerted effort to attack anyone associated with the Make America Great Again movement as fascists. So they trotted out the whole fascist meme quite aggressively at the midterm. And by the time they trotted it out again, which is this trope that they seem to deploy in the latter stage of elections involving a populist center-right challenger, and they do this, with Millier. They did it with Giorgio Malone. They did it with Alliance for Deutschland. They did it for Geert Wilders, and
Geert Wilders in the Netherlands.
And also Marie Le Pen in France. And so it's become a trope that has been overused, and they deployed it very aggressively towards the latter part of this election, which was frankly frustrating, and it was obviously in terms of the political science inaccurate. If you're going to call somebody a fascist or a Nazi, let's at least understand the political basis for fascism and its meaning, its literal meaning in political science. And let's not forget the history of the National Socialists in Germany that gave rise to the Hitler situation. So that was the run-up. Was it appeared that there was polling that was being biased by assumptions and probably undersampling of conservatives in particular. I hesitate to use the term Republicans these days. The Republican Party is largely seen as a euphemism for the one branch of the uniparty, and usually the folks around me refer to themselves as conservatives or constitutional conservatives or libertarians, and on the fringes, the intellectuals might consider themselves to be anarcho-capitalists, such as Javier Milei self-describes. So that was the run-up. We had got a call from Bobby's Maha group, the Maha Alliance, which we have donated to, just by disclosure, led by Del Bigtree. And Del contacted us and said, hey, would you guys like to be down in Palm Beach for the Maha Election Watch rally? And everybody assumes that the Trump rally was at Mar-a-Lago. That's not the case. It was actually in a convention center in Palm Beach. And Del said, if things go well, perhaps then we'll all go crash the gates at the Trump rally. We will move from the Kennedy rally to the Trump rally. So that, we basically, Jill and I decided to book the plane and book the hotel as soon as possible, because Palm Beach is going to fill up, and it did. And scooted down there the day before, did a couple of broadcast hits, and then in the evening, about 6 o'clock, went over to the Make America Healthy Again election watch and listened to Bobby Kennedy make his closing statement. And then the watch proceeded, and I got to talk to many people that were deeply involved in the Maha group and supporting Kennedy about a variety of things. Learned a lot more about how Bobby is anticipating operating, who his main lieutenants are, and what his potential priority stack was going to be. It was known at the time that he was desirous of the appointment to be HHS secretary. I don't know why personally. I think that's a horrible job, but he wanted it. And the smoke signals were that he wasn't going to get it. The concern about having him confirmed by the Senate, and Trump was signaling that something along the lines of Bobby being a czar, which is it's an informal presidential appointment that doesn't require Senate approval, and so that would be a lot easier pathway. And that he was going to give him responsibility for reforming CDC, FDA, NIH, and USDA, which cuts across cabinet secretaries. We have a Secretary of Agriculture, a Secretary of Health, and that would make it so that Bobby didn't have to be responsible for all the other stuff that's jumped into HHS budget. HHS budget, I think, is secondary only to the military in the United States, which is saying a lot. Early on, what was disclosed was that turnout in key Georgia precincts that were going to be important for Georgia as a swing state, precincts that would be expected to vote for Harris and had gone quite heavily for Biden, that turnout was low. And turnout in other precincts in Georgia that were more center-right, populist aligned, was quite strong. And there was other signals that the turnout in the more rural areas was quite strong, including here in my county in Virginia. So that was when cautious hope was merging. And then as the night went on, it just became more and more clear that things were really breaking in favor of President Trump and his team. I think not only Bobby joining, but Elon Musk was a big one. And Elon campaigned quite heavily in Pennsylvania, which was a key swing state. And I think he and Bobby and Tulsi deserve credit for bringing that one across. I think the Turning Point USA group gets a lot of credit for bringing out the younger vote. And Charlie Kirk deserves a nod, but there's other people behind Charlie that were very influential and active in bringing out younger and college-educated, college-age voters in favor of a more center-right position, and also in many ways supporting a more Christian position, because that's a key part of Charlie's coalition. So then, as things progressed, technically we had to make a decision about staying with Bobby's group or going over to the convention center. And Jill is not a big fan of crowds, and frankly, neither am I. And so we were going to just hang out in Bobby's place, which was comfortable, smaller group, a lot of people we knew, and good eats. What's not to like? But Mickey Willis passed the deadline when you could get into the convention center. Mickey came over and said, "Hey, I think we're going to go crash the gates." So Bobby's older son was there. In the end, he didn't join us, but he was strongly supportive. A bunch of us bundled into a van, scooted over, and Mickey had special high-level guest passes. He'd been at Mickey Willis, by the way, is the director and
Pandemic.
editor for the Plandemic series,
Yep.
including Plandemic the Musical, in which I have my acting debut, if you don't count my 2 rap videos with high res. Mickey got us all together. He had special passes, which we still, somebody suggested I ought to put them up on eBay. We kind of got special permission to go in. And then as we got into the convention center, apparently Bobby, Mickey, and I think her name is Marla Maples, a former Trump wife, a mother of Tiffany, all lent their voices to advocacy that Jill and I should be allowed into the inner circle. So we found ourselves in the midst of this huge crowd, sitting in the front row, looking on from the side, not from the absolute front, but in the front row, as Trump came on stage with his family. I got to meet Nigel Farage. He was there, and for some reason, Fox News trained their cameras on the 2 of us, so there was no way for me to know that was happening. But I was really glad to see Nigel and many other friends that were there. What I found fascinating about the convention center rally was, number one, Trump was kind of low key, circumspect, almost very centered and calm. Like he's kind of above all of the drama that's been circulating. And it certainly has been a lot of drama. The people around me, at least, were surprising to me. They were largely strong Trump supporters, many of whom had been in the prior administration, but what wasn't there was the usual congressional political actors. I didn't see Congress people and senators there. I saw hardcore Make America Great Again people and Bobby's entourage of about 15 folks in the area where I was. So I don't know if that was an intentional strategy or whatever, but I thought it kind of anticipated what we're now seeing with the appointments, which is a very strong commitment to people who are loyal and who have been subjected to all of these outrageous actions by the left, the lawfare, and the weaponized hate in media, the defamation, etc. That's kind of those folks are the core of what Trump is assembling now, plus Elon. I mean, Elon is clearly, Trump talked at length about Elon Musk and the importance of protecting our geniuses, and we don't have very many of them. He's repeated those lines. And clearly, Elon Musk has just become he's like a rock star among the Trump's world and the MAGA world, and clearly he's hanging out in Mar-a-Lago. It seems that all the action right now is in Mar-a-Lago, and the Speaker of the House is spending all his time there or in jets going back and forth there. He did come and speak to us at Council on National Policy last weekend, as did Steve Bannon, who's just out of jail and fired up. Another, if you remember the movie Network, mad as hell, and he's not going to take it anymore. So there's just a stream of consciousness of what it was like. We stayed up until about 4 a.m. and walked home because it was just jammed. You couldn't get through the streets or anything. Palm Beach was alight and party central, as you would expect. So we walked back home and then had to be on a jet at like 9 a.m. So that's how that went. And then since then, it's just been this rollout, almost in your face appointments or nominations for cabinet and sub-cabinet positions. As I said, very much focused on loyalists. Bobby got the nod for HHS, which I was surprised at, not expecting. But then who would have filled those shoes? Go ahead.
Tell me on that nomination, because you've mentioned a whole ton of people, and Elon Musk is one of the superstars and brings so much to the administration. I just watched the launch of their new SpaceX. It was last night in the UK at 10 p.m. UK time. I think it was 4 p.m. Texas time, and the launch of the largest ever rocket that SpaceX have launched. You've got all of that huge expertise, experience that Musk brings. But I think a lot of us will be actually even more excited at Maha and of what Bobby brings to this, because it's one thing going to Mars, that's beautiful, but actually if Americans are the most unhealthy nation in the West, then you've got a problem.
And we spend the most for healthcare, so it's just
I know it's bonkers. But tell me about what Bobby brings to it, because this issue on Maha and Make America Healthy Again, the health side, and then I want to touch on the pharmaceutical side. But he's got a lot on his plate. But as he said at one of the rallies, he has prayed to God to give him the ability to fix America's health. And God gave him President Trump. And that obviously went down very well with the audience. But tell us your thoughts on Bobby engaging on not only the FDA, but the whole industry, and actually beginning to change the rules, the legislation, to make actually the food that Americans have available good for them and to make America healthy again.
So,
I know you've just done a Substack on this.
Yeah, well, 2 of them. And we've been writing on health and wellness and food and supplements for quite a while now. Matter of fact, I just had a contact from a reporter from the Daily Caller wanting me to comment on the initiatives to take fluoride out of our water, out of the drinking water supply, for which Bobby is being excoriated right now. But unfortunately, the people attacking him on this have not followed the science, because the science has become quite clear on this, that we're overdosing people with fluoride, and that this has consequences, particularly during field development. So there's the good news about, there's multiple good news aspects to the Make America Healthy Again agenda. And in talking about that, I think we do need to acknowledge Callie and Casey Means' book, which has really lit a fire in the U.S. around awareness of the compromise of the food supply, the role of big ag, the promotion of a variety of unhealthy foods, the fact that the tobacco industry, particularly Philip Morris, after it had these major fines and tobacco became a less lucrative sector, turned its marketing and capital and scientific infrastructure towards foods. So the inference is that they took the business model of an addictive product, that being tobacco, and turned it onto the food industry so that we now have a number of very addictive foods, high fat, high sugar, etc., and highly processed. Kelly and Casey Means make the case that those products are specifically designed to trigger pleasure center responses that make them more addictive. Just, I don't know if you have the ads for Lay's potato chips in the UK, but the jingle is Lay's potato chips. You can't only eat one. So addictive foods, particularly snack foods, is extremely lucrative. So it's a target-rich environment, and it's amazing that healthy eating and healthy foods have not been part of the political discourse in the United States historically. And you would think that it would, and that perhaps that's an indirect sign of the power of big ag. On the topic of big ag, this is maybe too much of a nuance for the UK audience, but what really happened in the United States during the Nixon administration was there was a Secretary of Agriculture named Earl Butz. He was a rather crude figure. He ended up getting run out because he made some extremely crude statements in public and was unapologetic, and that was it. And he was out. But his position as Secretary of Agriculture was that America, there was a big push that America had a responsibility, because it was so wealthy and so productive, it had a responsibility to feed the world. And there was this belief that America could feed the world. Of course, what has happened practically, is that America has come to export high carbohydrate products into Africa and many other developing countries, and largely through these food programs and food subsidies, which in theory was for all the best reasons, has destroyed indigenous cultures, indigenous food norms, and indigenous agriculture. And so you've turned nations that were previously more or less self-sufficient in their food supply into highly dependent ones. And of course, this has also happened in the United States, most notably in some of the island areas like Hawaii and Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico, they're fat and they don't like to work, in general speaking. I'm sorry if you're Puerto Rican, please forgive me, but I've been there a number of times. And generally, the Puerto Rican population that used to be able to feed itself, very rich volcanic soil, now sees it as demeaning to work in the agriculture sector, and they're almost completely reliant on imported foods. So that kind of mirrors what's happened in a lot of the emerging economies. But so Earl Butz bought into this and had the policy that you needed to get it big or get out. And so this sparked a wave of consolidation, the destruction of the small farm in the United States, consolidation in big ag under Wall Street funding, and the transformation of American agriculture into large corporate farms. And the cynic's view of this has been that the major beneficiaries have been the manufacturers of very large ag equipment. I mean, it's typical for major agriculture equipment to cost many hundreds of thousands, typically millions of dollars for a big harvester or something. And so it's been great for business for John Deere and International Harvester, but it's decimated not just the small farms and the small farmers in the United States, but their communities. And so you, Peter, as somebody who has had your own de Tocqueville experience in the United States of traveling, I'm sure have observed the decimation of the small towns across the quote flyover states, the pejorative, that are now inhabited by the latest euphemistic aggression from Joe Biden was they're inhabited by garbage. Previously, it was deplorables under Hillary Clinton, but these people have been the backbone of America historically, and their towns are just just decimated economically because of these policies. And what it's given us is agricultural products that are highly dependent on, petrochemicals and these petrochemical-based sources of fertilizer, which are like a heroin fix for the soil. They boost up short-term productivity, but they decimate the flora and fauna that is necessary to. Soil is a living thing, and so you put these high salt, high nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium supplements on them, and and then you spray them with glyphosate, Roundup weed killer, and pesticides, etc. And you basically sterilize the soil, and it gradually gets depleted of the micronutrients, and its productivity just goes right down the drain, which is why there is this booming new sector of regenerative farming. So for Bobby, moving into this and the truth is that I as from a slightly outsider observer, I mean, Jill and I have been writing in the Substack for 3 years now about our own small farming experience. I think this is our 6th or 7th small farm. We've been doing it all our lives, and we've homesteaded the current one. But Callie and Casey Means' book and the interviews with Tucker and Rogan, as I recall, just went huge and woke everybody up. Bobby seemed to kind of jump on that bandwagon, catch that wave, because he wasn't talking about health earlier on in the campaign. And the Make America Healthy Again movement was born. And the amazing thing about it is that it cuts across party lines. And so, as I like to say, who doesn't want better food? And in Europe, it's long been an issue. Italy and within the European Union, Italy has strict food guidelines and bitches because the EU forces them to accept food coming from other nations that don't have such strict guidelines and exports its more pure foodstuffs into other European nations because that's the way the EU works. And the Italians don't like that very much, et cetera. And throughout Europe, I mean, there's been this movement to standardize cultivars. That's been one bitch associated with the EU, but also a much greater awareness of food safety. And the consequence is that a lot of our food products here in the States contain chemicals, let's call them contaminants, that are banned in throughout the European Union, and I assume or infer also in the UK. And there's things like Americans have this chronic problem now of celiac disease or gluten sensitivity. And it turns out that a lot of those aren't actually gluten sensitive, they're bread sensitive. And this has to do with a particular additive that the American baking industry puts in the bread that is banned in Europe. And so Americans observe that, and it has to do with making the dough stay sticky so it can be put on hooks and then matured with the yeast on hooks. So that has to do with mass production of bread, but that technology, that supplement is banned in Europe. And so Americans go to Europe and they're always, you hear the story again and again. I just don't understand it. When I eat the bread in Europe, I don't have the problem. And then I come back home and I do. Well, it's because we have these supplements and additives that you guys don't have. The other thing, just to illustrate, that's become clear is, and Jill's done a great job, my partner in every dimension, Dr. Jill Glasspool Malone, recently put out part of her bibliography that she's generated on the peer-reviewed science in glyphosate contamination, glyphosate being the generic term for Roundup. And remember, just to loop back, Bobby was part of the legal team that busted Monsanto over the Roundup toxicity. He won a huge settlement on that. So it's not just his work in Waterkeepers to, as he said, yeah, I've been all about getting the mercury out of the fish, and nobody calls me anti-fish, referring to his vaccine position and the paradox in the weaponized hate around that. But glyphosate is used in the United States as what's called a desiccant, and also in Canada. So the Canadian and American grain and soybeans, so this is corn, wheat, soybeans, barley, etc. They'll grow them, and then it used to be the way to do this is you would cut them kind of like hay and allow the seed heads to dry in the field, and then you would use your combine and harvest that and separate the seed from the husk, and that would produce your final grain. Now what's done is to spray the entire field with Roundup as it nears maturity. That kills everything in a simultaneous, harmonized fashion, and so it all dehydrates. That's the key thing, is getting the water out of it. It all dehydrates at the same rate, and then you can just go through. And what's done, frankly, is I mentioned earlier, these big combine harvesters are insanely expensive. And so in order to pay those off, what you end up with is work gangs that drive around with their combines and harvest field after field after field, fields that belong to different farmers. And so the practical implication is that you schedule your combine time in advance. Okay. And so that means that you can't wait for the weather for a sunny day like you do with hay to cut and dry. You have to have it ready for when the combine's going to come through. And so how are you going to do that? Well, you spray a desiccant. In other words, you kill it like it's a weed, and then it all dries at the same rate, and then the harvester can come through. But the consequence is that we end up with our oats, our wheat, our bread, soybeans, everything really, unless it's organic. And the USDA has allowed the organic label to degrade to the point where it almost means nothing anymore under the influence of lobbyists. And so so most of our grain supply is contaminated with glyphosate. So who cares? We eat a little Roundup. Well, the science has come out that glyphosate, for instance, in animal models, rodent models, which is the only way you can do this kind of study, if you administer glyphosate to pregnant rats or mice at levels that are equivalent to what's in our food stream right now from grain contamination, the pups, which is to say the babies from these rodents, exhibit two key findings. They behave in ways consistent with a human diagnosis of autism. Click, and he drops. And also they develop obesity. Click. Right? This thing that anybody that travels almost invariably comes back and says, "Oh my God, when I got into the American airport, people were so fat." Now, what's happening, of course, is that the American food, processed food industry is penetrating global markets now, and you're seeing obesity. Of course, obesity is rampant in the South Pacific, but increasingly throughout Asia, and increasingly even in Europe, so, let alone Africa. And so you can get McDonald's in Tokyo now, and in China. So that's the landscape that Bobby now enters and has a mission to address. And there's also, the stalking horse for this is Fruit Loops, an American cereal brand that's highly colored. And those bright colors trigger pleasure centers and desire in very young children that like bright primary colors. And so Fruit Loops are marketed to the youth. They also have a lot of sugar. So sugar and these artificial dyes, and it turns out a lot of the artificial dyes are really quite toxic. So there's a whole landscape of opportunity, and it's to help make Americans healthy again, or improve their health through the food supply. But to bring it back home, Donald Trump, as I understand it, has told Bobby that he wants to see statistically significant improvements in American health within 1 year. That's a heavy lift. So Bobby now has this mandate to take on big ag and big pharma, bless his heart.
Could I just to finish off with those two industries, and I've seen many videos comparing UK products with US products of the same thing. Lucky Charms being another one, along with Fruit Loops, where in Europe, actually, there are regulations, and for all the criticism of that, actually, it seems to have kept dangerous chemicals out of the food supply. But you've also got Big Pharma. Those two huge lobby organizations and industries, Bobby's got a lot on his plate, and I know the health is not just the food, and we don't have time to touch on the pharma side that says, well, here's a drug, you don't need to take responsibility for your health.
Yeah, here's a drug that's typically produced historically from the petroleum industry.
Yeah, wow, that's a whole program. But with Bobby going up against, it is a huge industry and massive lobby, and lobbying is the thing that we don't get in Europe or the UK.
It's legalized corruption.
Yeah,
if you want to put it in simple language that European audience can appreciate, it's legalized corruption. The industries basically, in a good case can be made that the pharmaceutical industry capitalizes American elections. It's that simple, all the way down practically to dog catcher. And it's the consequence of another bizarre practice from a European framework, which is that we allow the pharmaceutical industry to advertise on television and everything else. And the consequence of that is multifold. One is that we have these notorious bylines during the COVID crisis that were always popping up on corporate media, MSNBC, CNN in particular, sponsored by Pfizer. And it just became ubiquitous. It was in your face all the time, sponsored by Pfizer. And what that does is they're not necessarily selling a drug or a vaccine. They may have a drug or vaccine ad, but that's not the main emphasis. By providing this capital to corporate media, what they do is they create a dependency. Again, this is an addiction. They create a dependency on the part of media for the pharmaceutical industry money. And of course, this is also true of other major industries. A case can be made, the defense industry is one. But the way that this advertising gig works is that corporate media from left and right, CNN or Fox News, won't allow stories that might jeopardize their cash flow from that industry. So that is a very subtle but pervasive form of corruption. And then on the legislative side, these legislators have in the kind of mutually assured destruction environment of the American election cycle, where it historically has all been about how much money you can raise so that you can use media in order to reach voters, to persuade them of your case. In there's a whole ecosystem there that is really a psychological warfare ecosystem involving denigrating your opponent. So this is, and not to say that this doesn't happen in the UK, but here it's on steroids. And so you have to raise money, in there's a strong correlation between how much more money you raise relative to your opponent and your probability of win. And so who are you going to turn to? It's like Ghostbusters. Who are you going to call? So the easy answer is the pharmaceutical industry. They dole out money like Cadbury sweets. And so that's what's happened, is that they have, once again, if you want to get elected, you have to play nice with the big industries, because they're the ones that are going to give you the capital to allow you to defeat your opponent, whether it's an opponent on your flank or your opponent from the other party. So that's and that a lot of that flows back to, in the case of pharma, the decisions made, my understanding from Swiss reporters that I've spoken with, is that there was kind of a quid pro quo set up under Senator Edward Kennedy, that rammed through the legislation that allowed this to happen, and also basically prohibited the U.S. government from negotiating with the pharmaceutical industry for pricing through Medicare and Medicaid. The quid pro quo was, I'm told, that Novartis moved its corporate headquarters from Switzerland to Boston, which sparked the Boston Miracle of the biopharma complex that's exploded there, which of course was Senator Edward Kennedy's backyard. So that's one cynical version of how the ecosystem works, but that's what we're up against. And that's what Bobby is saying that he's going to take on. And so no surprise, the knives are out. The vindictive, nasty, that I know a reporter from the New York Times named Cheryl Gay Stolberg that I helped out long ago during the Jesse Gelsinger gene therapy death scandal at UPenn. And I spent a lot of time talking to her, pointing her to information, helping her to understand what was going on. And I don't think she got a Pulitzer, but it really jump-started her career as a science writer for the New York Times. So I was really disappointed when she came out with her hit article on Bobby that was just like a laundry list of all the ugly things that have been recited about him, down to the whale and, the dog or whatever the thing was, and it just like she took all those bullet points, strung them together in an article and published it. Didn't bother doing any independent research or actually thinking about stuff. She just recited the hate lines. The Guardian put out an interview from Carolyn Kennedy, ambassador to Australia, that was just, how could you say that about your, family member? And also called Tulsi Gabbard basically a Russian sympathizer. It's just the press, the mainstream corporate media in the United States is compromised. They're very, very biased, and they seem to no longer have any sense of integrity or shame. They have no shame. They'll just they're all in on the defamation and slander. Of course, Donald Trump has been the poster child for this, but now Bobby's getting it, and all the nominees, Matt Getz, who's smart as a whip, but also very outspoken. And there's been multiple attempts to take him down over various sex scandals. And those are all being now replayed in the effort to keep him from becoming attorney general, because, of course, there's the fear on the left, and particularly in the FBI, that he's going to come in and hold people accountable for what they've done over the last 4 years. And, there's photographs of mobile truck paper shredders being pulled up in front of these large government buildings right now. So it's interesting times, and of course, Peter, just to allowing me to rant, thank you. But I was on an international Zoom call on Sunday night, came back from the CNP conference and had to be on this call with people from Puerto Rico and Canada and Europe and the United States. And they wanted to hear about these kinds of things like we've just been talking about, my impressions, which frankly are quite sobering right now, my perspective on all of this. But they were really alarmed about the saber rattling in the United States and the prospects of nuclear war. And I told them, oh, that's so yesterday. You know, I heard all about that when I was in Geneva. Everybody was afraid of that. But I haven't heard anybody around me in the conservative groups that I circulate talking about that. And then boom, the next day, authorization for American missile use in penetrating Russian borders. And today's article is that we have these UK drone missile kind of cruise missiles that are dual use. They can be used for thermonuclear weapons or for conventional weapons that are being launched into Russia. And you know, there's no intrinsic way for Russian air defense to know whether it's nuked or not nuked, nuked or e-nuked, when those cruise missiles are coming in. You know, it seems as if this is a last-ditch effort to grab territory and escalate in anticipation of a initiative that Trump has announced that he intends to shut down that war, as well as the conflict in the Gaza.
No, I've seen that in Storm Shadow missiles in the UK. And God forbid Trump would want to end a war. I've seen that. And I've seen the attacks on Bobby here in the UK, non-stop attacks from the BBC, Independent, Guardian, all across the place. And I concur with your watching adverts for US pharmaceutical products in hotel rooms in the last 2 years. And half the advert is about the side effects. So why do you want to take a tablet for a headache whenever you could die of heart attack? I'll stick with a headache. Thank you very much. But I've seen that. So there's so much happening. I'm really excited. From thousands of miles away, Robert, I share your, I think, excitement at what Trump has brought after the election in terms of the appointments. Not only Bobby and Musk, but many, many others. And he seems to be so ready and prepared to hit the ground running on the 20th of January. And I think because of that, there is huge hope, not only in the US, but I'm hoping some of that hope spills over on this side of the pond. But we'll see how it develops. But Robert, as always, I appreciate your expert analysis, your thoughts. Obviously, you've been there in person at that election party, and so much is going to happen, I think, with many of those appointments. So thank you so much for giving us your thoughts on all of those.
Well, thanks for having me on again, Peter, and I look forward to our next chat.
Very soon. Thank you, Robert.